Tommy Bolin's meteoric rise in the rock world was as electrifying as his tragic fall at age just 25. His Astrotone Fuzz pedal played a pivotal role in the tones that crafted the legend. Today we're taking a deep dive into a DIY build on Tagboard using vintage components to build an Astrotone Fuzz pedal. Can we truly capture the tone of a rock legend taken too soon? Let's find out. This one's going to be a super fun project. It's a small circuit with only 6 tags per side, which is fun. And I've got some really cool capacitors and resistors to see us through. Recently, I spoke to Mike from Seeker Effects on our podcast, the Pedal Dive podcast. And we talked about these caps that he'd sent me. They're from Sagamo. These were found in the old Dan Electro amps and amps of that ilk. It's a 50 NF cap, and I'm after a 40 NF, or 47 NF I should say, in this circuit, but I think this will do nicely. And then also I've got this massive Weimer cap. It's a vintage one. It's also 47 NF. That's fun. And then for our diodes, we're going to be going with some massive silicon rectifier diodes. I think on the drawing I'm looking at, it says an unknown type, possibly silicon. Well, these are the most extravagant silicon ones I've got in stock, so I'm going to be using them. I have no idea how they sound, and if they sound bad, we'll just switch them out. Let's get going. I'm going to start from left to right, and oddly enough, starting on the left is a 1.8k resistor. Of course, I can't find my 1.8k resistors. It's first thing in the morning here, probably 5:30 in the morning. Yeah, 5:30 in the morning here. I can't be bothered digging around for them. So I've got these 1.5k precision resistors and 33 ohm precision resistors, and if we add 33 ohm to 1.5k we get 1.8k. so that's what I'm going to be going with. So to do that, I'm going to use my old helicopter method that I'm sure everyone's bored of me telling you about. I take one 1.5k, one 1.8k, cross over the leads like this, and then just wind them together like helicopter rotors. And as I always say, I'm sure regular viewers will be sick of it by now, but I would never go up in a helo, not in it for any amount of money would you get me going up in one of them bloody death traps. I've picked too many of them out of the water and there's never any survivors. Never. I think you must be insane to go up in one of them things. Right, after we've twisted them, we're going to wet the tip and then solder that bit together. You don't need to put too much on there. Really, it's just to hold them in place. And then when you're snipping it, as I've said in the past, try not to snip too far down close to the resistors, because what you'll find is you don't get a good connection and they'll just fall apart. It's much better to come a little bit higher up. There's me snipping too far down. Well done, Joe. A little bit higher up, leave a bit of a tail on there, and then that way you've got a bit of strength there and it won't come apart as soon as you put it in your circuit. Now I'm just going to bend both the bottom legs out like so, and then there is our 1.8k resistor. And just to prove that it is 1.8k, we're going to use our trusty old Fluke 101. As ever, if you want to get one of these Fluke 101 meters, there's a link in the description below for the Amazon affiliates link. I do get a small kickback from it, but there's no extra cost to yourself. If you help the channel by buying stuff through them links, that means I can afford to buy more stuff like these resistors, for example. There we have it. It's 1.53k, and that is close enough for government work. Now this resistor is going to go in the first 2 holes on the left hand side here. There we have it. Now I'm going to solder one end in, and then I'll be able to lift the resistors up so that then they are straight, and then I'll be able to move on and put any other components in that I need to. There we have it, 1.8k fitted on the board. Next is going to be another 1.8k going from here to here. However, this time I'm not going to solder this top end here, because we are going to have our next component going into this tag as well. There's both of our 1.8k resistor networks in place. I haven't soldered this end because we have a 470k going in next, and that's going into this tag here, and then down to the 3rd tag on the bottom row, like so. Now I can see that the third tag on the bottom row has another component going in it, so I'm not going to solder this end. So if I try and slide this component as far up to the top as I can to give myself room to get in here, as I've chose rather a beefy resistor, we'll just solder this end in like so. Give it a quick tidy up, and there we have that component in place. Next is going to be a 47 NF cap, and that's going to go from the third tag on the bottom to the third tag on the top, and there's nothing else going into, oh, tell a lie, there is a wire going in here and going across to here, but I'm going to mount that under the board, so there's nothing else going on these two tags. So I'm going to go ahead and fit that cap now. I think I'm going to go with this Weimer cap for this one. It's a rather large cap. I quite like the fact that it's massive and unnecessary. As you can see, some people asked me in my last video, why do I clean the legs? Or why do I use my snips to go over the legs? And look at the state of these legs here, that's why. Because they're just unacceptable, really. Everything that's on that leg is going to end up either impeding your solder joint or making its way in there, and you don't want that. And after I've finished doing it, the leg looks much cleaner. See a bit of shine on it there. And same with this leg here. It's just best practice. I absolutely hate that terminology, best practice. What the Navy does is they make loads and loads of regulations. There's BRs, which are, we call them BRs, the book of reference. And it's basically a book on everything. You have a BR for everything, including like brushing your teeth or right the way up to firing a missile or something. There's a BR to tell you how to do it all. And what they do is they say, follow the BR and you can't be wrong. And then when they change their mind, they say, well, best practice says that you should do this. So it's basically just a license to do whatever the hell you want, whenever you want, which is most frustrating, especially as a military man. I'd much rather follow the BR and the rules. Either way, there you go. Right. Can you believe that Cardinal Black are back over in the States on tour? I'm a massive fan of Chris Buck. He's one of my favourite guitarists. He also got me in Guitarist magazine when I had no right to be there. I mean, I was still building pedals on my wife's dining room table, and he took one of my Rangemasters, put it on his board, and went to the Guitarist mag and talked about it. It's insane. Speaking of fine attire, like my Cardinal Black t-shirt, if you'd like to support the show, please check out our caps and t-shirts, mugs, and other merch below. It really does help us fund extra pedal builds and other projects, which means that I can bring more value to you guys in the future. Cheers. This cap actually has a line on it to show the inner and outer foils. I'm not sure, because this isn't the input cap, I'm not really going to follow that. But this side would be what I would call the positive. So I'm going to put that facing towards the transistor. I don't know whether that's going to make a difference in this one. But the next cap that we fit, the Sagamo, is going in the input cap position, and that will make a difference. Right, to fit this, because it's a bit long, I'm going to bend the legs inboard and then just fold them out a bit with my Nipex snips. I think it's just about time I got a new pair of these. So this is my new pair, but they're getting a bit battered. And this is my older pair that I use for snipping thicker component legs or things I shouldn't really be snipping with snips. I use these ones so I don't trash these, but they're both getting a bit beyond the pale now, so it's almost time for me to get a new pair, which is exciting. There's nothing quite like the feeling of a new pair of snips for the first time, apart from, of course, putting your soldering iron in the solder cleaner for the first time. Brand new solder cleaner, yes please. Right, okay, so there's that in there. I'm going to go ahead and solder both ends now. Now we've got our 22k resistor, and I've got this really old carbon comp. It's actually a 20k, I believe, but it's out of tolerance. Well, it's out of spec, not out of tolerance, because there's like a 10% tolerance on them or something stupid like that. It's out of spec at 22k, so that works for me. And that's going to go straight up and down from the bottom tag to the top tag. As we can see on our drawing, this top tag has a 1 meg going into it too. Now normally I would mount them on the outside of the tag board through the center holes. However, because the Sagamo cap we're using in the next tag along is massive, I want to save some space there, so I'm going to mount it on the board. To that end, I won't be soldering the top tag. That is one bad thing about using such large caps like the Sagamo and the Weimer, is the fact that The caps actually hide these resistors really. It's quite hard to see, but it makes me happy to know that they're in there somewhere. So I'm going to use them anyway. I'm sure there'll be some naysayers in the comments there. And I've gone with these tiny carbon comp resistors for the 1 megs just to offset the fact that I'm using massive caps, and it'll squeeze in there nice and neat underneath it and not get in the way, because I think the Sagamo is going to be a bit of a pain to fit, if I'm being perfectly honest, but such is life. And there we go. I'm going to solder the top end of this 22k resistor and the top end of the next tag along, because the Sagamo is going to go in the center lugs just because it's so big. Now it's time for this beast. So I'm going to bend the legs straight up and down. Now best practice, there I go again. Best practice is to have the value and the amount of voltage that it can handle at the top. I do like to do that. However, I really like this Sagamo stamp, so I'm going to put that facing upward, like so. And then this end, the banded end, the negative side of the cap, I can't remember if it's the inner or outer foil that denotes, but either way, that's going to point inboard to the circuit. So this end here goes to our input, and that end goes to our circuit. So I'm going to put it in this way round. And because this cap's massive, I'm not going in these center tags. I'm going to try and put it in. In fact, it's even too big to go straight in these center lugs. Back to the drawing board, I think, with this one. So rather than doing that, what I might do is mount it a bit higher, and then, as I've done in the past, run wires up and attach them. Let me have a think. This is my solution. So I've just soldered in 2 of the component legs from before, from this 470k resistor, because they were nice and thick, into the tags where our Sagamo input cap is going, and I've just pointed them straight up in the air. And what I'm going to do is I'll take my Nipex snips, and round about here I'll take a bend in it so it's lying flat 90 degrees, pointing outboard from the circuit. And same again on the other side. I'm going to try and get it so then it's the same height. Doesn't matter too much, but nice if it is. And then we have this sort of shape. If we take our Sagamo cap, rest it on top of, in fact I'm going to shorten that leg there just because it's going to get in the way while I'm doing it. I'll rest it on top of these 2 ledges, if you like this. And now if I can solder the legs of the Sagamo to the component legs that we've just fitted there, what we'll get is we'll get the weight of the cap resting on the component leg here. Fine, it won't matter once the solder's in there, but that'll give us a chance to solder these 2 connections, and then we'll have our Sagamo cap sitting tall and proud above the circuit, which is what I want. Just thinking, some people may think, how on earth did you solder that in place without using any handy arms that hold it? And I was just about to solder off camera, and I realised I might as well film it. So what I like to do is clean your soldering iron first and wet the tip with a healthy dollop of solder this time. Hold your cap in place to where you want it to be, exactly, and then choose an end. And what I call a tack solder, it's not, you don't tack solder anything, but if you're welding, you do a tack weld to hold something in place, don't you? Or you do, for those who don't know. I'll just rub a bit of solder on, just enough to hold it. It's a bit difficult with the thicker components, but just enough there to hold it in place. And that wasn't enough. Well done. There, to hold it in place. Look at that, this is how difficult it is. I haven't even managed to solder it in place. Ha! Right, so you put just enough there to hold the component in place. Come on, like so. And now we can solder this end correctly, and once that's in and stable, we can go back and tidy up this end. My advice is that you touch both legs while you're soldering, but try and focus on the leg that is thickest or doesn't take the heat the most, which in this case is the Sagamo. And that way you'll get a good solder joint. So there's the first solder joint in. Now before I go and fix this end, what I will do is just straighten up the cap and have it so then it's how I want it to sit on the board. Then I'll go back. Look at that. Nip-X snips, a stand as well as snips, multi-tool basically now. Then I'll go back with a clean soldering iron and sort out this solder joint that we butchered before. And then we can tidy up this leg as well. If I don't throw the job away. And then that way we have our Sagamo cap sitting nice. It's sitting straight and it's above the board, so I can get in and work on our diodes, which oddly enough are next. D1 and D2. So this is symmetrical clipping. So we're going to have one anode facing that way, one cathode facing that way with the anode facing the opposite way. Why do I always mess that up first time round? I'm sure it's my dyslexia. And then the other cathode pointing the other way. So then we're clipping both halves of the sine wave. Okay, it's time to talk diodes. Now, I have shown this a few times, and usually it's on the back of what we would say in the Navy, the back of a fag packet or any old scrap of paper translated to normal speak. This is actually a box off a pedal. Well done. Here's our signal. So if we use this here, this is our sine wave. You have the positive half and the negative half, and that is basically sound. And as you strum your chord or make your beautiful music, this sine wave will be moving along past this fixed point in time. So you have sine wave moving, moving, moving. And we've all seen like videos of an oscilloscope where the sine wave is moving along. Now what our diode does is at a certain point of this sine wave, depending on how strong the diode is, at a certain point of this sine wave, the diode will fire. So for example, this diode may have a forward voltage. In fact, shall we check what the forward voltage is? Why not? On our Fluke 101, you can go to the ohm sign and press this button twice and you go into the diode setting. If we go to this, and it's going to be this way round, your black lead will go to the negative half of the diode. This actually fires 0.5 volts. So half a volt that puts out this big diode. If we take a 4148 diode and check that, that puts out 0.56 volts. So I haven't chose two different, drastically different diodes, but it puts out a different voltage. We're going to pretend that this one puts out 0.7 because that's what they normally put out, is 0.7 volts. Anyway, if we take the R2 diodes, they fire at that rate. So 0.5 volts is what this fires at. And if we put that on that scale, we could have 0 volts here. We could have 0.5 volts there and then 1 volt there. So this diode fires at 0.5 volts. So that means that the positive half of this diode will conduct and send a line up from 0 and it will fire at this point here. And that means that we are clipping our signal at 0.5 volts. Now, if this is our signal, only half of it is clipped. This half of the signal isn't clipped. But what you commonly see in pedals, and this one that we're building today is no exception, is the diodes pointing in opposite directions. So because the diodes are pointing in opposite directions, the other diode will clip the other half of this signal, which will be at also 0.5 volts. And you'll get clipping that is symmetrical because it's the same on both sides. And then this sine wave will move on and the next sine wave will come through because you're strumming a chord and it rings out, and that sine wave will get clipped the same. Now, if we were to get rid of one of our lovely 0.5 volt firing diodes and change it for something like this, and we're going to pretend, for argument's sake, that this is a beast and it fires at 1 volt, and we were to put our 1 volt diode in here, it would fire at this point of the circuit, and that would mean that the clipping happens all the way up here. So that means that half of the signal is big and half of it is a bit smaller because this diode's weaker, and I know I've picked the bigger one to be weaker. Maybe this is short man syndrome from myself because I'm 5'7". Anyway, so some asymmetrical clipping would have a large signal on one side, which is 1 volt in this case, and a smaller signal on the other side, which is 0.5 volts in this case. So if we were to use these two diodes, we would get asymmetrical clipping, and that's because they're not the same. And even if they were putting out the same voltage, they react in different ways, because it's not just voltage that matters. There's other factors in there. You know, how fast does the diode fire that signal and clip it? You know, all of these sort of things matter. This is oddly enough how a Type 23 frigate gets its normal propulsion. We have 750 volts DC signal sent to an electric motor, and to get 750 volts or up to 750 volts, we use diode clipping, if you like, to get the amount of voltage, and then apply that to the ship shaft, which moves it through the water. No one needs to know and or care about that. But anyway, that's our asymmetrical clipping. Now, if that is clear to you, great. If not, please let me know in the comments. And if you want me to go deeper into diode clipping, I'll do a whole video about it. I'm super interested in diode clipping. And of course, you can do it on paper as much as you like, but when you get it in a pedal in different circuits, it reacts differently. So what I find is that until you understand how each diode type reacts with a different type of circuit, it's probably best practice, again, that word, best practice, to socket the diodes and then try different ones. And then when you get a feel for what works for you, because there is no right and wrong answers, of course, when you get a feel for what you like, you can just, you know, mix and match between the styles that you like. For me, in a tube screamer, I love MA150 diodes. I like them symmetrically, I like them asymmetrically. I even like them with two diodes on the same side, firing in the same direction, which means that if we take our two 0.5 volt diodes, put them in series so that one's firing into another, you'll get 1 volt out. So you get a 1 volt signal, you double the strength of them. Which again, I like that too. Asymmetrical clipping where both diodes are on one side instead of pointing in opposite directions is also a good sound. But it's all about mixing and matching. Most times in things like a Rat, or even in things like a tube screamer, I prefer it if you just clip the clipping diodes out and have none at all. Sacrilege, I know, but that's what I like. So let's move on to adding our diodes to our circuit. Now these diodes are going to go, I've got it upside down, going to go symmetrically, which means they're going to go like this, with the cathode pointing up on this one and the cathode pointing down on this one. That means that we're firing 0.5 volts at each half of the circuit. There's both our diodes in place, ready to go. I had to mount one off the board because the component legs were so thick on this thing that there's no way I was getting it through the tag. Now we're on to the components mounted to the outside of the board. First up, we have a 47 NF going from the centre of this lug here to the centre of the next lug along. I'll be using this JB cap for no other reason than I have it in stock, and I know Marcus Reeves used these in his pedals, Reeves Electro, massive fan of his, so I thought if they're good enough for him, they're good enough for me. Ha! The legs just snapped on it, so that's a no-go. Back to the drawing board, I think. We'll use this 47 NF cap, and I'll find a different one for the position I was going to use this in. So through these two lugs here, and then we'll give it a solder. Look at that, well done. Not holding it in place properly. What I'm going to do is I'll solder one leg in, and then I'll straighten up the cap and go back and finish the other leg. That way I know it's even. I mean, not that that affects the sound in any way whatsoever, but I do like it to look the way that I want it to look, because why not? Right, so now that that's straight, I can flip it over and solder the bottom of the component leg into the tag board, because I don't want to risk with this big iron getting in there and burning any of the components, because it just looks terrible and I'd have to take them out. There we go, there's our first outboard capacitor fitted. Now I'm going to go on to the 1 meg cap, 1 meg cap, what am I saying, 1 meg resistor that goes between the next two pins from our 47 NF Weimer through to the 22K that we can no longer see because of this Sagamow cap. There's our 1 meg resistor in place, and the keen-eyed among you will have noticed that I actually put this Sagamow cap in the opposite way round to what I was meant to. So I was meant to put the line to this end of the circuit, So we're really going to find out if the inside and outside foil matter in this fuzz, because this isn't the way that I intended to fit it. If the pedal's noisy or excessively noisy, because I do anticipate it to be a bit noisy, I will just flip this cap round and see if it makes any difference. Seems as our cap snapped, I've moved on to a Mullard mustard cap, and I'm going to fit that in this way round. All I'll do is, once I've cleaned the legs, there you go, got to clean the legs. I reclaimed this one out of an old radio. So if I bend this long leg over and mount it this way round, which is how it was mounted in a radio, and we're going between the third tag along on the top and the fourth tag along on the top. I'm just going to slot that in there. Looking at it, it's going to be a hell of a squeeze because of this big Weimer cap. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go to these outside posts here, and then I'll bend it up straight and it can sit on the outside of the board. The issue we're going to have here is this tag here, which is the fourth tag from the left, is going to have the collector of one of our transistors in. So I won't solder that in, and I'll solder it in when I've got the collector in place. So the first thing to do is just to solder the other end of the cap, and then that'll be holding the cap in place while we move on with the rest of our circuit and our transistors. So if I tidy that up, bend the cap up, there we go. Now that looks okay to me. And then when we come to fit our transistor, I'll just slot the leg in between that leg there. If we go back to our drawing, we can see that there was indeed a link that I missed out from the top end of this 47NF down to the bottom of our clipping diodes. I said I was going to mount it under the board, and I am. So if we take a bite of cable from about there to there, that should reach. So if we snip that off, we know we're going to go from this tag here, which is the third tag along. So I'll strip one end, give it a tin, and place it into the third tag along. Now we can solder that in place, and we know that we've got the right tag, because what happens is, if this is why I don't like mounting things under the board, is because when you're looking at it upside down, if you're anything like me, it just confuses you and you end up soldering them into the wrong positions, and inadvertently you'd have to pull the board. So we'll check it again. The top of this Weimer cap and where it meets this cap, right here is where we've soldered in. Perfect. And it's going to go down to the very end cap on the bottom row, the very end tag on the bottom row, into the bottom of our resistors, which is here. So I'm just going to strip the wire with enough wire to reach there, give it a little bit of a twist and a tin. Twist in a tin. Hey, that's got to be a t-shirt on it. Right, and now we can just slot our wire end into the tag, solder that in place, and there is our underboard wiring complete. Now I realise that some pedals that gets real complex, and I'm throwing it away, and it's not as easy as that, but that's it for that one. And if we just have a check around, make sure that we've got every outside component, which we have, we can move on now. In fact, do you know what I'm going to do? Let's get our drawing up again. We can see that there's two earth connections. There's one in the second tag along on the top and a last tag along on the top. I'm just going to go ahead and join them together under the board in the same manner. There we have our earths joined together. Now all I have to do is, when I'm wiring this up, I can just take one of the earth connections to earth, and that way I don't need to worry about adding the extra wiring. It's just nice and neat. Now onto the transistors, and if we get our drawing up, it actually says Q1 and Q2 are meant to be 2N3566, or sometimes SM07027. Now I don't have either of them in stock. I've never even had either of them in stock, but it does say that any NPN silicon with a gain of around 300 HFE will work. Perfect. So in the Q1 position, on the right hand side here, because if we look at our drawing, we can see the attack pot is also our input, and the pin number 2 of that goes straight to the 47 NF cap and then to the base of Q1. Now Q1 I'm going to put is slightly less gain, and I've got this whether it shows up on camera, is a Texas Instruments BC182L. This is a rather nice transistor. It's an old one, and I'm gonna have to cross the legs on this because I'm pretty sure the pinouts on these are not the same as a regular pinout. So let's get it hooked up to our DCA 55. I say this all the time and I'll say it again. If you build pedals, any amount of pedals, more than one, you need one of these. They are fantastic. Right, let's get it so there's no shine on there. Basically, it'll tell you the leakage for germaniums or, you know, the gain and what have you. So this is telling us it's an NPN silicon. It tells us the pinout, but we'll come back to that. Current gain, HFE, is 285, which is bang on where we want it to be, around 300. Don't need to worry about any of them. Leakage current, silicon transistors do not leak, so it doesn't matter, that's nothing. And if we go back to our pinout, we can see that the red is the collector, which is in the center. And if we go back to our drawing, we can see that the collector needs to be on the left hand side and the emitter needs to be on the right hand side of the base. So I'm going to have to, if we go back to this, the green is our emitter, which is going to go on this hand side. The blue is our base, which we want to go in the center. And the red is our collector, which we want to go on the outside edge. So if we cross them two over, like so, the transistor is going to go in this way round into my tag facing, with the flat side facing outboard. What I will do is I'll just use one of my offcuts of insulation. If I just straighten the edge up, cut it to the length of leg that I want to have, I can just slide it on that middle leg, and that'll keep the crossed over legs separated from each other. You don't have to do this, you could just bend them so they don't touch each other, but I think while you're here, why not? And if you look at like all the good builders, they probably put sheathing on all of the legs, and that is no doubt better, but I'm not going to do that. This will suffice. So if I put them three legs where they need to go on the tag board, like so. Look at that, I can't even get them in. I'm not even on a ship anymore with it rolling around and I can't get them in. Now what I like to do is, once it's in place, I solder the center tag, center leg of the transistor, and that way you can straighten the whole thing up. So the other two legs are in the tags that you want them to go, because they clearly don't want to go in this one. And then you can straighten up the transistor to how you want to have it sit on your board. I'm going to use my flat nose pliers, grab all of the legs together and bend them in unison to get them to go where I want them to go. You've got to be careful here not to snap the legs as well, especially if you're using old transistors. What you don't want to do is snap one of the legs off, because that is the transistor ruined, and you know, no one wants that. And I've made a bit of a hash of that one, but basically what we're trying to do is get the transistor to sit as straight as possible on the tags, but still go in the tag. So now I'm going to go ahead and solder them other two legs in, like so. Here's one, and now the other. And remember, this one's a little bit more difficult because we have our Mullard mustard cap going in there as well. There is Q1 in place on the board, and I think that sits there rather nicely. Now on to Q2. For Q2, I'm going to go with a BC183LB. Now these sound really good in a fuzz face circuit, same as the 182Ls. So I figured, why not? Now, if I remember rightly, this one is slightly over 300. These usually test around 320 to 350. So if I take my DCA 55 again and hook it up, you may have noticed that I've added a different clip to this one. I did have a crocodile clip on here for ages, and I was really struggling with it, and I kept saying I was going to change it, and I never did. And now I've just went back to a normal clip, because although these are amazing and I couldn't live without it, the clips on them are bloody terrible. Right, let's see what we got. This confirms that it's an NPN silicon transistor. We'll leave the pin out for a second, and the current gain, HFE, is 328. So this one's a little bit stronger than the last one, which was 380 odd. This one's a 328, so nearly 330. If we go through, again, there's no leakage. Now our pin out. The red is the base. Oh no, I'm going to have to cross this one round the opposite way. So the red is the base, collector is the green, and the emitter is on the end. So that means that we're going to have to change round the collector and the base. So now we've got the red is the base in the center, the green is the collector on this side, and the blue is the emitter. So now I'm going to have to go ahead and get another offcut of wire, put it on the center leg of this one. Oh well, at least they'll look the same, and then mount that on the board. Right, so now we've come to mount our Q2. We remember that this side here is the emitter, which on our drawing we can see goes on the left hand side. So we want to flip this over and have this pointing on the left hand side, base in the center, which we have covered in our sheathing, and the collector on the right hand side. Now if we go back to our drawing, you can actually see that the collector also has the 9-volt supply in it. So I'm not going to solder the collector in until it's in the pedal and we're wiring up our 9 volts. But we can also see that our emitter goes in the second tag along into with our 47 NF cap. The base goes into where the 470k and the 47 NF Weimer cap fits, and then our 9-volt collector goes in with the 22k. Now if we just lie that flat on the desk like so, solder in the center pin as before. We can then straighten this up so that then all the legs go where they need to go, although it doesn't want to go. Right, there we go. It's in place. Our legs are where they need to go. All I need to do now is solder in this half, which is the emitter, because nothing else is going to go into that tag. There is our tag board complete. Next step is going to be to mount it inside the enclosure. And here we have the enclosure and all of the hardware. For the enclosure, I went with this dystopian finish, graffiti yellow over blue nitro. I don't even know what I would call this, but I went with this finish anyway. It's a bit out there. I do like the artwork that's on it. And I also have to point out that I went with a centralized stomp switch for my buddy Craze Fandango, who is clearly a massive Tommy Bolin fan. And I know how much he hates my off-center foot switches, which is why I chose this shape enclosure actually to force me into putting the foot switch here. Although I've got to say, Craze Fandango, if you're watching this, which I know you will be, he actually bought a pedal off me in the Birmingham Guitar Show with an off-center foot switch. So I don't know what he's talking about. I think he gravitates towards it. I actually think he prefers the odd asymmetrical shape of it. Let me know in the comments what you think about a centralized stomp switch compared to an off-center stomp switch. In this enclosure, it kind of forces you to go in the center, hence why I chose it. Our controls are attack, which is a 100k, tone, which is a 10k, and then volume, which is also a 10k. So usual Switchcraft style jacks, they're not Switchcraft, but I get them from a place that makes them to that standard. They're pretty damn good. And then our gold pin 3-pole double throat switch, along with ridiculously big washer that some people love and some people really loathe. I'm not sure why, but we're going with our ridiculously big washer, even though it's going to obscure some of the artwork. So now it's got me thinking that maybe I'll swap that out for a smaller one, but we shall see. There's everything mounted on and in the enclosure. I'm really liking this tag board and how it looks inside the enclosure. However, it was a bit of a squeeze. If I hadn't used these small alpha pots, I'd have never got it in there, which is insane really, because it's a small circuit. This is how we're looking on the top. I'll get onto the knobs later, but right now we're going to wire the thing up. And Usually I forget, but what you should do, and I'm going to say that saying again, best practice, what you should do is tape off your stomp switch. Right now, it sounds weird, but if you build a lot of pedals, you get a bit of crud built up on your desk or on your mat. And these mats, by the way, are again available through the affiliates link in the description. They're fantastic, they're large, they haven't got them crappy magnetic things to hold screws in, which just attract all of the offcuts. Hate that, but these mats are brilliant. Anyway, your mat gets a bit dirty and it marks the top of your switch and you end up having to get rubbing alcohol and clean it, and it's just a pain in the backside. So if you tape it off, that doesn't happen. I'm going to start left to right, and I'm also going to start on this top row because there is only 2 connections on the top row. And the first one is labelled up as a yellow number 3 on our drawing. And if we go to yellow number 3, it is the tone control. So it's the left hand side of the tone control. But as we can see on my pedal, I've got the tone control mounted facing the opposite way to avoid the circuit. So it's going to be the right hand side on the tone control. I can't tell you how many times I've mounted pots this way round and then forgot and put the wires going in backwards, which means that when you turn the tone up, it goes down. Not really that important. I mean, you could just pretend it's a Vox amp, right?
So it's kind of a reverse dial if I turn it here. So let's try it out here. You can hear that this will muffle it.
But no. So first of all, we've got this far left tag here is going to the tone control. There's our tone control wired up. From here straight to this pin here. Next is going to be our earth. Now if you remember, we wired the negative. People tell me off for saying earth because it doesn't actually go to earth in these circuits. It's the negative side of power. I completely get that, but on a warship, everything is earth to the ship's hull ultimately. So the ship sits in a body of water, which is salt water, conducts really well, and that becomes like a master ground, if you like, earth. So I just call everything earth. That really annoys people, I'm sorry, I can't change. 22 years of doing it, it's just not going to happen. So next is the earth, the negative. If you remember, the earth was here in the second tag along and here in the 6th tag along. We join them together under the board, so we only have to run 1 wire. And I have another special mention of these weird screwdrivers. I really can't remember who suggested these to me. I'd love it if whoever suggested them writes in the comments and lets me know so I can thank you properly, because they are fantastic. I never really considered screwdrivers. I mean, I just nicked some from my last ship and just used them, but these are really good. They're small. There's a good range of tips, and the best thing about them, not only do they feel like sturdy, you know, sometimes you just pick something up and you're like, yeah, that feels good, fine, whatever. I'm certainly not going to pay £30 for a set of screwdrivers just so then they feel good. But in the palm, there's this little twisty thing. Now, I've never had a set of screwdrivers with this, probably because the Navy's too cheap to pay for them. But if you hold it in your palm there, you just twist the screwdriver away. It's amazing. Anyway, if you want a set of these, again, there's an affiliates link in the in the description below. I use it for all sorts. I use it to guide the wires and tuck it round places, whatever. We are going to be running back to the pedal. More importantly, we're going to be running from this connection here and not this connection here, because I've already got a wire here and I want to keep as little wiring looms or as little wiring runs as I can, just because I think it looks better. I don't think it affects the sound, and if it does, it probably has a negative effect, but I like to have the wires all together. So I'm going to run a wire from here. It's going to come round and it's going to go to this pin here on our DC jack, but I'm going to run it really long, and I'm going to skin the wire from here, take the insulation off, and then the bare wire is going to run across the top of our 2 earth connections for our jacks. So here's our wire attached to the 9-volt jack, and it runs across the top of our 2 input and output jacks to the earth points. Now I realise I only need to go to one of these, and then the mechanical connection between the enclosure and the jack will earth it out, but I always put the wire in, just because if this comes loose for any reason mid-gig, it'll still make sound, but if we're relying on a mechanical connection, it won't make sound anymore. And that to me, just, you know, thinking of gigging musicians, that's no good. Now I'm going to run the wire round here and into this tag here, which is also joined to this tag, as we've previously stated. Then I'm going to run another wire from here round and to our 3-pole double throw switch to the center pin on the front side, and that's going to be the earth for our LED. Now, serious question. When I'm running these wires, would you guys like to see me run them? Or would you like to see me say, I'm going to run a wire from here to here and then cut to the next screen and the wires run? The reason I ask is, a lot of people that I watch, I mean, mainly my favourite person on the internet is Uncle Doug, who does the amp repairs and amp mods and stuff. He's amazing. But when he's doing this work, he cuts from telling you what he's going to do to what he has done, as opposed to showing. And I'm kind of doing a bit of both at the minute, so let's show this wire going in. And if you could write in the comments what you prefer, and I'll deliver what you guys want. Now, the wire comes out the back of our 9-volt switch, and it comes round here. And I like to use my screwdriver. I use the medium flathead tip mostly, just to manoeuvre the wire, manipulate it into places, and bend it, and hold it while I take the length of it. And then I can snip, and strip the insulation before tinning the wire. And that's why I use the screwdriver. I find it really hard sometimes when I'm working from my office in work. Obviously, I'm still in the Navy. I'm still full-time service. I'm in the engineering school at the minute, so I've got a desk job, HR. It's a bit boring, but there you go. When I'm in work, and if I forget my screwdriver, I'm kind of stuffed trying to use my fingers doing this, and I don't know whether that's just muscle memory from always using the screwdriver to manipulate things, or whether it's because it's easier. I don't know. I'd love to know what you guys do to manipulate your wires around. Now, once it's in place, I'll be able to manipulate that further once it's soldered in. But once it's in place, we can move on to our next wire, which again, I'm just going to strip and tin. See how easy it is to strip this wire. That's why I use the silicone stuff. It's just because there's no messing about. You can just use your snips and just straight off with the insulation, which is ideal, especially if you're building a large pedal and you haven't got time to go and get the wire strippers out and stuff. I don't bother with them. I mean, on board, there's no way I'm going 5 decks away and, you know, half the length of the ship to get a set of wire strippers when I've got me snips in my pocket. It's not happening. I do get a lot of people telling me that I'm using the wrong tool for the job and stuff, and in a lot of cases I am. But again, it's force of habit from being on board. You know, time is precious. You've got to get stuff fixed there then, and then move on to the next thing. It's like putting out little fires all day to make sure that the ship's operational. That's why if I was to walk around with my electrical kit, i.e. like I'd have a gas soldering iron or whatever, the Nipex snips, a small screwdriver. I've only just got this one, but I would normally have one I've stole from the ship, and flat nose pliers. They would just be in the side pocket of my overalls, and you can do most things that you need to with these, and of course an adjustable spanner. Close your ears, anyone who's actually an engineer in the Navy, because we hate adjustable spanners on board ships. I don't know why. It's like they always say, get the right spanner. Well, no, just take the care not to round whatever it is off that you're unscrewing, and then you've got the adjustable spanner. I would rather someone used an adjustable spanner and got the job done quicker than, you know, walking around the ship aimlessly looking for tools. It really used to wind me up. Anyway, don't have that problem anymore. Right, we're going to run the wire underneath the board as much as possible, and then when we get our cable ties in, we'll pull it out and cable tie it all. And then round the back of the switch, most people would run the wire to the front of the switch and just go straight up, but it kind of impedes the board and goes over the top. It looks a bit messy. I find it easier to go out the back and make like a ponytail coming out the back of the switch. And I'm totally au fait on ponytails now because I've got a 5-year-old daughter. Let me tell you that I would rather do a military operation than do her bloody hair in the morning. She wants a full-on plait every day, and it looks like a dog's dinner if I do it. Terrific. I don't know. Definitely a mum's job, that one. Anyway, so we snip the wire to length, strip it, and then we can just tin it and solder it straight in. There's no other wires going into this connection. And then once we've soldered it in place, we can snip off the excess. It really irks me when I see people not snip off the excess. It doesn't do anything electrically or mechanically or whatever. It won't affect the sound, but I just like it snipped. I don't know how you feel about that. We can use our screwdriver to poke it in place and get it round. And I want to move that in a little bit more and get it closer to the already existing wire without moving this out. And there we go. That's our earth pretty much sorted out now. The only thing we need to earth out is our LED, and I'll run that round to a resistor coming out of here later on. That's one of the last things I do. Next up on the list is moving to this line on the tagboard, the bottom half. And if we start left to right, on the far left hand side we can see there's a purple number 3 on our drawing, and if we follow that along to our pots, we can see that purple number 3 goes to the volume pot, which is a 10k pot, lug 3. Now this is coming from our output cap, which is this 47 NF. We use the blue cap in here because if you remember, the JB cap snapped. Brilliant. So we're going from this output cap. I'm going to follow it along this wiring loom and go straight to the volume pot here and pin 3. You see what I did there? Cut straight to the wire, complete. Ha! So this is the other style where I tell you what I'm going to do and then complete the job and cut straight to it. Here's our volume pot with our wire attached, and that runs round this wiring loom. It will tuck in once I get the 5,000 cable ties on there. Round to our output cap here, the bottom pin over here. Now next, if we look at our drawing, we can see that we've got our emitter, base and collector for Q2, and in the collector is our 9 volt. Now this would normally go straight to 9 volts to the DC jack. However, I'm going to build a 9 volt filter board with not too much resistance in it because I'm unsure how much voltage affects this circuit because I'm not au fait with this circuit. But now I'll show you how to build the filter board. I've stole this from a Crybaby wire from back in the day. I think I found the schematic online a long time ago. I miss out the polarity protection diode. You should probably put that in if you're planning on plugging your pedals in the wrong way round. However, for me, I feel like that's natural selection. You plug it in the wrong way round, it's done. I'm sure I'll get loads of hate in the comments for that. Bring it on. This is everything you're going to need to build one of these 9 volt filters. Now, this will work with any pedal. If you think you've got a noisy power supply, then this may help. What you will need is 2 small value resistors. I'm using 390 ohms at the minute. The original just had a 1k resistor on the input, but I put 390 ohms on both the input and output, rather than just having one resistor on the input. Just thinking of it like an amplifier. You'll need a 100 UF cap or 100 microfarads. I'm using this JB cap. And then a 100 NF or 0.1 microfarad cap. I'm using this box ceramic cap just because I like them. So first, we're going to add in our 100 microfarad cap. Now, what you've got to think of this is, if you imagine this circuit to be 2 lines, we'll have the live up this side and the negative at this side. Every component, or every capacitor, not every component, every capacitor is going to connect to both live and negative. So we're going to have our electrolytic cap going through these 2 holes, but where we really want to solder to is the negative rail and a live rail. Remembering that this cap is polar, so the negative side must point to the negative rail and the live side must point to the live rail. And then this cap, doesn't matter which way around it goes because it's not polar, we'll do the same. We'll have one half of it going to the negative and one half of it going to the positive, like that. And then if we're going to just fit our electrolytic cap over here, I like to put them on the outside edges of the board. That'll become apparent in a minute, but you can fit them anywhere really, as long as they connect to the right places. And then if we bend the legs out, all I will do then is I'll solder our box cap in here to the negative and positive rails, and then I'll solder in our electrolytic cap to the negative and positive rails. There we are with our caps now fitted to the board. As you can see, this is our negative rail and this is our positive rail. Now on the positive rail, we want an input and an output, and that's where these resistors come in. What I do is, first of all, because they're old ones, I clean the legs. You may ask, why 390 ohms? That's a valid question. Why not I don't know, 450 ohms. I'll tell you why, because I bought a massive box of 390 ohm resistors and I thought they'll come in handy for something, and this is what they come in handy for. So once we've cleaned them, we take 1/2 of the resistor and just bend the leg over it into a little loop and snip off the excess, and same with this one. Like so. Now these go into the live side, and I like to mount them in the center of the two caps. You could put the caps in the center and mount these on the outside edge, or you could do cap resistor, cap resistor. It really doesn't matter as long as they're connected to the right points. But if I add in one resistor and then our second resistor, there, they both go into the live rail. Now I'm going to solder them in. Before I do that, just one quick note. It doesn't matter which is the input and the output. You'll have 9 volt coming from your DC jack, coming to one of them, and then 9 volt coming from the other one, going to your pedal. It doesn't matter which way round you go, but I would say that if you're going to take your LED's 9 volts from anywhere, take it from the side that doesn't go to your pedal. So for example, when I'm running this now, I'll run 9 volt to this, and then from this, I'll run 9 volt to my LED. And this side will go to my pedal. It just means that there's, you know, some resistance and filtering in between your LED and your pedal. It'll probably make no difference, but if you've got the option, why not do it? There's our little board now attached in the enclosure. And now I have been asked a few times this week, funnily enough, how I attach these boards to the enclosures. So let me tell you, I use this stuff. Sellotape, sticky back foam. It comes in these little sticky foam pads. They're great. I stick 2 of them together on top of each other and then mount that to the bottom of the circuit. And then I use a few dabs of JB Weld steel reinforced epoxy to hold it down as well. So a few dabs on each side of the pad, and then maybe a large dab on a circuit board somewhere at the bottom. And that'll then hold it secure. I found that when I was just using this stuff, if someone was touring in heat, then it could, you know, unstick, and that's no good. So I use a bit of both. This really creates a space between the board and the enclosure, and it also adds like an instant stick. So while you're working on the pedal, it's stuck down while the JB Weld is setting, which is handy. Yeah, so that's the stuff I use. And if you want this, I'll add a link in the description to the exact one that I buy. So then, you know, they're not all created equal. The Sellotape brand that I found is better. Anyway, moving on to the pedal. So next, we've got this earth wire hanging about. I'm going to deal with that first. And I'm going to send that straight around, following our same wiring loom. Let's just bend it around with my screwdriver. Following the same wiring loom, and it's just going to go straight up and attach to the bare wire just up here. And how I'm going to do that is, if I again use my screwdriver, I line it up so then I take a bit more wire than I need, not very much, but a bit more. And that's so that then when I strip the insulation and make a hook out of it, I've got some space to do that. We'll tin it, and then what I like to do is just bend it over and make a hook. And then we can hook that hook over the top of our solid core wire. You can give it a squeeze and get a good mechanical connection. And that'll stop that from happening. Look at that, there you go. So as I went to solder it, it lifted up off because I hadn't squeezed it. I was trying to be clever and rush. So the best thing to do is hold it in place and give it a squeeze. Probably with your flat nose pliers as opposed to your cutters, otherwise you'll end up cutting it. Can't tell you how many times I've done that. Especially when you're trying to rush like I am now. So give it a squeeze, that'll hold it in place, and then you can just wet the tip with hay and give it a solder. Oh my god, it's just come off again. What? Right, clearly I haven't crimped it enough when I've been going on, so I'm going to hold it in place and then just solder it on. There we go. Done. Wow, that was a kerfuffle, and that's why we cut straight to the finished product, so you don't see me faffing about. Get in. Right, now that that wire's in place, we can get back to our circuit drawing, which was wiring in the earth, which comes from the fourth tag along from our transistor leg and goes round and into these two pins here. But because we've added our 9-volt filter, it's going to go round and attach to our 9-volt filter. And then our filter is going to come out and attach to these here. There's our first wire attached from the transistor leg here, round to our 9-volt output from our filter. Now the input to the filter, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a wire from here down to this. Now rather than trying to run a wire from here to the 9-volt, to the live side of our LED, what I am going to do is I'm going to run our resistor, our current limiting resistor, straight from this resistor to the LED. Instead of running it on the negative side from the switch like I normally do, I'll run it this way round just because that will be easier, and I'll have all this space here to add in that resistor. But first things first, to add in the wire, I'm just going to strip a fairly large amount off the wire insulation, give it a tin, and what this is going to allow me to do is insert it through both sides of the DC jack. Now one of these is meant, it's a switched connection, one of them is meant for adding in a battery, but as we know here at Hello Sailor, we hate batteries unless it's vintage fuzz. Unless you're building something germanium or PNP, there's no way I'm sticking a battery in it, not a chance. So what I do is I just connect them both together, mainly because I can never remember which one is the switch one and which one isn't. I'm pretty sure it's the center one's the switch one, but you know, I could be wrong there, I'm not sure. Now we're going to run this wire round the same wiring loom, so round the back of the pot and then through to this resistor here. So if I just tuck that in there with my screwdriver and then run it round and into this resistor. So I know I'm going to end about there, so I can cut the wire, strip it and tin it. Now I'm just going to rest this through the resistor without crimping the resistor, the loop that we made on this resistor, without crimping it closed. I'll just rest the wire in there, and now I'll go away and get my current limiting resistor, and I'll be able to poke that through too and run it straight to this leg. What I must be careful of is this is the output of our whole circuit, and it moves in and out as a jack is attached. So I need to make sure that this resistor is below that where it attaches to the LED. Otherwise it's going to foul the 9 volts when someone plugs a jack in, and that's no good. That's our resistor fitted from this connection here round and to the 9 volt I keep saying the 9 volt, to the positive connection of our LED. That's all of the wires now attached to our board. Next I'm going to focus on the pots. So the input and output connections come through the attack pot on the left here and the volume pot on the right here. So pin number 3 on the attack pot is going to come round this wiring loom and round the back of this stomp switch and go into the front left pin here, which is our input to the circuit. And the output of the circuit is going to come from our volume pot here and follow around the same wiring loom, same way, and go to this connection here, which is the output of our circuit. That's our input and output of our circuit sorted. Next up is going to be the earth connections or ground connections for each of our pots. Now the tone pot, pins 1 and 2 are going to go to ground, and then pins 3 on our volume and attack pots are also going to go to ground. There's all of our pots grounded. The last thing we need to do is one of the last things we need to do is to run our signal actually in and out. So from the input jack, remembering that the pedal is upside down, so the input jack is on the left. From the input jack signal lug to the output jack signal lug. So it's going to run, wire's going to run round here through this wiring loom and go into this connection here, which is the input. Then we're going to add a small link wire between these two pins here, which would be our bypass. So when the pedal's off, the signal will go this way. And then we're going to go from this pin here round to our signal carrying pin on the output jack. And that is the signal sorted. And then the last thing to do will be just to connect our earth or our negative side of our LED round, and then to this pin here on the 3-pole double throw switch. And this is the finished product. We have our wiring loom sorted out with some cable ties in it. Now we're ready to go for the sound sample. But first, I'm going to go ahead and get the knobs in place and remove this bad boy. And now we're on to the bit that everyone's been waiting for. It is, of course, the sound sample. Can we get this Astrotone Fuzz pedal to sound like Tommy Bolin? Now, clearly, my playing is never going to sound like Tommy Bolin because I'm not a guitarist, I'm an engineer. But I've drafted someone in special. It is, of course, the man whose namesake is after one of Tommy Bolin's instrumental songs. Craze Fandango, the man who loves off-centre foot switches. Thank you, Craze Fandango. Take it away. If you like this video, you're going to love this video where I try and recreate the legendary tone of Paul Kossoff.